Hello everyone, for our series about the early imperial Roman camp, today we talk about the Latera Praetorii. We have introduced the early imperial Roman camp on the base of the Pseudo-Aeginus, the Munitionibus Castrorum, and so that we have outlined, generally speaking, the structure of the camp, and already looked at the Praetentura, if I'm not wrong. So I will also create a specific playlist for the Roman camps videos, because as you know, we make the ones all over from archaic to late Roman Byzantine times. So this one corresponds to the largest camp that we know. Of course, we have this extraordinary work that tells us in great detail. Otherwise, we would have to rely on pretty vague information. After all, so we're pretty lucky. What was the an early imperial Roman camp for essentially 3 imperial legions plus 4 Praetorian cohort plus lots of auxiliary troops, and this was something that could host like even up to 45,000 men. So this was conceived basically in the treaty as the largest type of Roman army that you couldn't find, right? At least the largest camp, as you know, the more or less at the time, that there is nothing that can be, maneuvered effectively in campaign, in battle as a single block that basically is more than 50,000 men. Would have been just a miracle by itself. Naturally, the Romans had at that time the scale capacities of achieving something like this, but we always have to understand, of course, that these camps didn't all come into like a standardized form. Like the Romans actually, there can be a debate legitimately about this, because the Romans actually were probably the people who had the most standardized camps. But when we talk about standards, we have to talk about, yes, the general structure, but what of course, first of all, the size of the army was. Secondly, also the terrain and the time available, and the situation in the campaign. You can't always, right? The standardization of the Roman camp was actually a great display of Roman power, training, discipline, and probably esprit de corps, because the legionnaires were properly obliged to make an entire camp every single day, right? Something enormous as an effort, but it still built in that sense their own sense of duty. It kept them fit. It was something that went beyond just the military need, maybe just encamping in an enemy territory. They did it all the time anyway, right? And that is a training that about which we are told, but that still doesn't give us any specific information of why and how the Romans would do this, and other great powers historically would behave in slightly different way. And of course, we can't presume that also the Romans, at the end of the day, were kind of a bit more relaxed, especially in considering that this whole thing also had a cost. So we will not digress in this aspect that is secondary. We just know that the Romans used to do this, and that a camp is necessary in the first place from a logistical point of view, even before the strictly military purpose that had somewhat a defense. But the army was meant still to fight outside of it. And we look at at the structure, that therefore it was the one of the grand camp for even lodging the emperor, etc. So the Latera Praetorii were properly the ones. If you look at this was the central part of the camp, right? That hosted properly the Praetorium. So where the headquarters were, but these were the pavilions reserved to the headquarter, known as properly Principia, from which the name of the same Via Principalis, the principal road in the camp, and the lodgings of the emperor and or of the other commanders, right? The commander in chief, not necessarily just the emperor per se, or the figure of the emperor proper. Every commander was provided with the imperium, of course, but here we're talking properly about the emperor. And around the praetorium was contemplated security band, let's say of 20 feet, garrisoned by a bodyguard known as statio, right? So station, fundamentally. etymologically. And at the entrance of the Praetorium, on the right, from the side of the Via Principalis, there was the Auguratorium. That is where the commander-in-chief, in fact, he would detain the Imperium and therefore acted as a medium between Jupiter and the world, let's say, where officiated the religious ceremonies. We made a video about the official religion of the Roman army at this point. You can check that. And while on the left instead was placed the tribunal. That was technically that elevated platform from which the speeches to the soldiers were addressed. And next to this, security band of the Praetorium, it was delimited on both sides a 60 feet wide band, let's say, in which the prefect of the Praetorium, facing on the Via Principalis, and let's say the emperor's retinue, this could and or of the commander, known as the Comites Imperatoris, so literally the count. It's also the etymology of the name, and of the emperor, that were like. I don't know. The other day we were talking about the 36 BC Antony's Parthian campaign, and then, at that point, this place would have hosted just the foreign officials, allies, things like these, figure of high rank, and just, literally the familia of the emperor, the attendants, the ministers, and so on, whoever could come at that point there, as you can imagine. And separated by a 20 feet wide road, were located and properly encamped 4 Praetorian cohorts, 2 per side, each one with an available space that was double compared to the one granted to the legionary cohorts, right? This was, of course, the recognition of the higher quality of the Praetorian cohorts that the Praetorians had higher privileges, better pay, better equipment. They were already essentially, veterans who had proven their own military value. And in the same space reserved to the Praetorian cohorts were lodged also the primipili centurions, so the centurions' first spears, essentially the best soldiers of the legion, best soldier of the legion in the first place as NCOs. These were hell of death machines, and the evocati, so the also still the centurions evocati, so those who were also other veterans who were called after their service was over, were maintained essentially in the army. And following that, there was on the left side of the Praetorium the horsemen of the emperor's personal guard, the famed equites singulares, that were essentially the most elite of the Roman corps, in the number of 450. These were highly trained, sometimes decades-long trained elite troops that were skilled properly, each one in a kind of specific field, mostly military engineering, but they constituted, we'll talk about them, the finest of the Roman army. And the Praetorian cavalry, that were other 400 men on the right side. And if their number is not uniform, they dispose in such a way to grant an equal balancement of the spaces, so they would partially share, right, this between these numbers. They of course could float, by the way, because they weren't always the same. Here we get the figures from how it should be in theory, but this is just a manual, and just the same numbers could be depleted and so on. So as we're saying before, also armies differed in size, and so all these measures in feet, etc., could change. And then on two sides were lodged immediately after a road of 20 feet long 5 ally quingenarii of cavalry for a total of roughly 2,500 men. And in the most external areas, essentially at bordering the Via Sagularis, the first cohorts of the legions and some eventual vexillationes of other legions were lodged. The first cohorts were composed each by 5 double sentries, occupying thus a double space compared to the other cohorts. Right? There's debate whether this was kind of a standard thing in the army, but we're told, at least in some instances. So we're talking about essentially either 120 per 360 or 180 per 240 feet. The vexillationes occupied an equivalent space to one of the average legionary cohort instead. And if the camp hosted up to 3 or 4 legions, the first cohorts of the 3rd and of the 4th legions were lodged in the Praetentura, that is, either left or right of the Porta Praetoria. And from 5 legions up in number, the 4 first cohorts were lodged in the Latera Praetorii, the others in the Praetentura. And if the space allowed it, for example with 3 legions or less, in the same area could be lodged the 2nd legionary cohorts or a quingenario auxiliary cohort, right? So here the measures that were given, by the way, are for essentially a standard camp that would have lodged, let's say, it could welcome, of course, given that it was the largest, even a lesser number of troops. And here also the auxiliary ones would have, probably varied. And we should talk at some point about an early imperial army, Roman army, organic, because it was still very much loaded with lots of other troops who were not properly Roman themselves. And the in any case, we will pass then eventually to look at the other elements of the camp, namely the retentura, for example, and others. For now, however, we stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.